Welcome, everyone. Prepare to journey back to a time of stark Puritan life, a world steeped in religious fervor, and a very real fear of the unseen. We're heading to colonial Massachusetts, to the year 1692 and the infamous Salem Witch Trials. This isn't just a historical event. It's a dark mirror reflecting the power of fear, the dangers of mass hysteria, and the fragility of truth when suspicion reigns supreme. What comes to mind when you hear the words Salem Witch Trials? Images of pointy hats and broomsticks, perhaps. Let me know your initial thoughts in the comments below. The real story is far more complex and far more disturbing. It involves young girls experiencing strange fits and contortions, accusations hurled like daggers, and a community tearing itself apart from the inside. We'll see how whispers of witchcraft turned into a raging inferno, consuming innocent lives and leaving an indelible stain on American history. How could this happen? How could a society founded on principles of faith and order descend into such chaos? Was it simply superstition, or were there deeper, more insidious forces at work? Stick with me as we dissect this haunting tale, exploring the dark corners of the human psyche and the chilling consequences of unchecked paranoia. We are going to discover what really happened in Old Salem. Part 2. The Journey of Accusations. A descent into madness. The Salem Witch Trials. A chilling episode in the annals of American history, stand as a stark testament to the destructive power of mass hysteria and the fragility of justice when fear reigns supreme. This dark chapter unfolded in the small, rigidly Puritan village of Salem, Massachusetts, in the year 1692, leaving an indelible stain on the collective memory of a nation. It was not a tale of a single, malevolent individual, but rather a collective unraveling, a community's tragic descent into a vortex of suspicion, paranoia, and ultimately, profound injustice. A spark in the tinderbox. The afflicted girls and a diagnosis of evil. Our journey into this dark labyrinth begins in the winter months, in the austere, dimly lit household of Reverend Samuel Parris, the spiritual leader of Salem Village. Here, his 9-year-old daughter, Betty Parris, and his 11-year-old niece, Abigail Williams, began to exhibit a series of bizarre and disturbing behaviors. They would fall into sudden fits, their small bodies contorting into unnatural positions. They uttered strange, unintelligible sounds and screamed as if enduring unimaginable agony. These were not isolated incidents. Soon, other young girls within the village began to manifest similar symptoms. Anne Putnam Jewar, a close friend of Abigail and a member of the influential Putnam family, along with Mercy Lewis, Mary Walcott, and Elizabeth Hubbard, joined the growing ranks, afflicted. In the deeply religious world of 17th century Puritan England, where the existence of witches and the devil's malevolent influence were accepted as undeniable truths, the diagnosis was swift and chilling the girls were bewitched. The local doctor, William Griggs, after exhaustively searching for a physical cause and finding none, offered this supernatural explanation. His pronouncement, delivered in a community already teetering on the edge of social and political instability, acted as a spark landing on dry tinder. It ignited a raging firestorm of fear, paranoia, and suspicion that would engulf Salem, consuming innocent lives and leaving a legacy of trauma and regret. This fear was not unfounded in the minds of the villagers, who lived under the constant threat of attacks from Native American tribes, often perceived as instruments of the devil. The recent conflicts added fuel to the fire of their anxieties. The first accusations, convenient targets, and the power of confession, under relentless questioning from anxious and deeply concerned adults, the afflicted girls, now thrust into the unwelcome and unprecedented role of accusers, initially named 3 women as the source of their torment: Tituba, Sarah Good, and Sarah Osborne. These initial targets were far from random selections. They were, in many ways, convenient scapegoats, individuals who already occupied the fringes of Salem's rigid social hierarchy. Tituba, a South American Indian, slave in the Paris household, was perhaps the most obvious choice. She was known to have entertained the young girls with stories of voodoo and magic from her homeland, tales that likely captivated their young imaginations, but also marked her as an outsider, a figure of suspicion in the eyes of the Puritan community. Her different cultural background and practices made her an easy target for accusations of witchcraft. Sarah Good was a homeless beggar, often observed muttering to herself as she wandered the village seeking charity. Her poverty and social deviance made her an easy target for suspicion in a society that valued hard work and conformity. Her muttering, possibly a sign of mental illness or simply the complaints of a destitute woman, were interpreted as curses and incantations. Sarah Osborne was an elderly, sickly woman who had already drawn the community's disapproval by marrying her indentured servant, a significant breach of social norms. Her weakened physical state and unconventional marriage made her a convenient target for accusations of witchcraft. Her infrequent attendance at church meetings further fueled suspicions about her piety. The trials began in the court of Lyre and Terminer, a special court convened specifically to hear these witchcraft cases. These proceedings were far from impartial. They were a disturbing spectacle, a theatrical display of fear and religious fervor. The afflicted girls were the star witnesses, their every twitch, every scream, every accusation treated as irrefutable evidence of diabolical activity. The courtroom became a stage for their dramatic performances. They would writhe on the floor, claiming to be bitten, pinched, or choked by invisible forces. They described seeing the specters, or ghostly apparitions, of the accused tormenting them, spectral attacks that were, conveniently, invisible to everyone else present. Tituba, perhaps under duress, or perhaps in a desperate attempt to save herself, confessed to witchcraft. Her confession was a watershed moment, a turning point in the unfolding crisis. It was filled with vivid, fantastical details of encounters with the devil, who she claimed appeared to her in various forms, including a tall, dark man, a hog, and a great black dog. She described signing the devil's book, a large tome filled with the names of other witches, and flying on poles to secret, nocturnal meetings in the forest. Her confession, though likely fabricated under immense pressure and possibly influenced by the leading questions of her interrogators, was exactly what the court wanted to hear. It validated their deepest fears and confirmed their suspicions that a vast, hidden network of witches was operating within their seemingly pious community. It also provided a template for future confessions, setting a precedent for the kind of testimony that the court deemed acceptable and actively sought. Sarah Good, defiant and unrepentant, maintained her innocence throughout her interrogation, but her sharp tongue and rebellious spirit did her no favors. She was found guilty and sentenced to hang. Sarah Osborne, frail and in poor health, died in prison before she could be brought to trial. The accusations escalating. From outcasts to pillars of society, Tituba's confession had a profound and devastating consequence. It opened the floodgates of accusation. If one person could confess, it implied the existence of others. The hunt for more witches intensified, driven by a potent cocktail of fear, paranoia, and a desire to purge the community of perceived evil. The circle of suspicion widened rapidly, expanding beyond the initial group of marginalized individuals. No one, regardless of their social standing, was safe. Accusations began to fly against more prominent members of the community, individuals who had previously seemed untouchable, shattering the illusion of safety and order. The trials became a weapon wielded indiscriminately, tearing apart the social fabric of Salem. Martha Corey, a respected, church-going woman, was accused, sending shockwaves through the community. Her skepticism about the trials and her vocal criticism of the accusers likely sealed her fate. Even her own husband, Giles Corey, initially believed the charges, later recanting, a decision that would cost him dearly. Rebecca Nurse, a 71-year-old woman known for her piety, was another shocking case. Despite her reputation, the afflicted girls persisted in their accusations. Even when initially found not guilty by the jury, the girls continued their dramatic displays in court, leading to a reversal of the verdict. Her execution sent a chilling messaging. No one was beyond the reach of the witch hunt. Spectral evidence and the court's complicity. The reliance on spectral evidence was a defining feature and a critical flaw of the Salem Witch Trials. This type of evidence, based entirely on the visions and claims of the afflicted girls, was inherently subjective and unverifiable. The girls asserted that the specters of the accused were attacking them in ways that were invisible to everyone else. The court, led by magistrates like John Hathorne and William Stoughton, not only accepted but actively encouraged spectral evidence. They believed that the devil could not take the shape of an innocent person. Therefore, any spectral apparition must be a genuine representation of the accused's guilt. This flawed logic created a system where accusations were tantamount to convictions. The burden of proof rested on the accused, who had to somehow prove their innocence against invisible, intangible evidence. A society under stressing, underlying tensions. To fully understand the Salem Witch Trials, we must look beyond the courtroom drama and examine the broader social, political, and economic context. Salem Village was not a harmonious community. It was a society rife with internal conflicts and anxieties, land disputes. Disputes over land ownership were common and often bitter. Religious discord. The appointment of Samuel Parris as minister had been contentious. Political instability. The Massachusetts Bay Colony was in a state of political uncertainty after its charter was revoked. Fear of Native American attacks. The constant threat of attacks created a climate of fear. These factors created a volatile environment where the witch trials became an outlet for underlying tensions. Accusations often followed existing fault lines within the community, allowing personal vendettas to be settled under the guise of rooting out evil. Key players: the accusers, Abigail Williams and Putnam Jutter, and others, whose dramatic performances in court were central to the trials. Their motivations remain a subject of debate, ranging from genuine belief to personal gain and manipulation. It's also worth noting that some historians believe a fungus found in rye bread, called ergot, may have caused hallucinations and other symptoms that were misinterpreted as bewitchment. The accused, Bridget Bishop, the first to be executed, Reverend George Burroughs, a former minister accused of being the witch's ringleader, and Giles Corey, who refused to enter a plea and was pressed to death, all highlight the diverse range of individuals caught in the hysteria. The officials, John Hathorne and William Stoughton, who presided over the trials, were firm believers in witchcraft and staunch supporters of spectral evidence. Their rigid adherence to their beliefs contributed to the tragic outcome. The turning point and aftermath. The tide began to turn when accusations reached high-profile figures, including the governor's wife. Clerical doubts, especially those expressed by Increase Mather in his Cases of Conscience Concerning Evil Spirits, began to gain traction. Governor Phipps eventually dissolved the Court of Liar and Terminer, establishing a new court that disallowed spectral evidence. By the time the trials ended in early 1693, 19 people had been hanged, one pressed to death, and several had died in prison. The Salem Witch Trials left a lasting scar on American history, serving as a cautionary tale about the dangers of mass hysteria, the abuse of power, and the critical importance of due process. They highlight the fragility of justice when fear supplants reason, and the enduring need for critical thinking and the protection of individual rights. The trials continue to be studied and analyzed, offering valuable lessons about the complexities of human behavior and the dark potential that resides within all societies. Part 3G: The Pursuit of Justice, Investigating and Apprehending the Witches. It's essential to understand that the term justice, in the context of the Salem Witch Trials, is deeply problematic. The crimes investigated were accusations of witchcraft, acts that were not crimes in any modern legal sense. The entire process was fundamentally flawed, driven by a confluence of factors: profound religious conviction, mass hysteria, pre-existing social tensions, and a judicial system that accepted flimsy, subjective evidence. Nevertheless, to understand the events in Salem, we must examine the procedures used to investigate accusations and apprehend the accused, as these were the mechanisms of justice, as perceived by the Puritan community of 1692. The genesis of an accusation, whispers, suspicions, and formal complaints. The process usually began subtly, with whispers and suspicions circulating within the tightly knit community of Salem Village. These initial murmurs often centered around individuals who were already marginalized or considered different in some way: the poor, the elderly, those who didn't conform to social norms, or those who had existing conflicts with others in the community. The afflicted, girls experiencing their strange fits and exhibiting bizarre behaviors, would often, under the prompting of adults, give voice to these pre-existing suspicions. These initial whispers would eventually solidify into a formal complaint. This complaint, a crucial step in the legal process of the time, was typically lodged by one or more of the afflicted, girls, their families, or other members of the community who believed they had witnessed evidence of witchcraft. These complaints were presented to the local magistrates, the individuals responsible for upholding the law and maintaining order in Salem. The complaints themselves were often dramatic and detailed, filled with vivid descriptions of spectral torment, encounters with the devil or his familiars, and other alleged acts of maleficium, harmful magic. The accusers would describe being pinched, bitten, choked, or otherwise tormented by the specter of the accused. They might also recount seeing the accused engaging in activities associated with witchcraft, genocide, such as attending witches, sabbaths, or consorting with demonic entities. The magistrates, gatekeepers of Puritan, justice. The magistrates in Salem, most notably John Hathorne and Jonathan Corwin, were not merely passive recipients of these complaints. They were prominent and influential figures within the community, deeply embedded in the Puritan power structure. They were also firm believers in the reality of witchcraft and saw it as their duty to root out this perceived evil from their midst. Upon receiving a complaint, the magistrates would carefully consider the accusations, often questioning the accusers further to ascertain the details of their claims. It is crucial to note that these magistrates were not impartial investigators in the modern sense. They actively encouraged the afflicted girls to name their tormentors and often used leading questions to elicit specific names. Their questioning was often guided by their pre-existing beliefs about witchcraft and their desire to confirm their suspicions. They believed their role was not just to investigate, but to actively combat the perceived threat of the devil working within their community. The issuance of arrest warrants. Formalizing the accusation, once a magistrate was satisfied that a complaint had merit, and the threshold for merit was alarmingly low, they would issue a formal warrant for the arrest of the accused individual. This warrant was a legal document that authorized the local constables to apprehend the accused and bring them before the magistrates for examination. The warrants typically included a brief summary of the accusations and the names of the accusers. The issuance of a warrant was a significant step, as it formalized the accusation and set in motion the legal machinery that would determine the fate of the accused. It transformed suspicion and rumor into a formal legal charge. With all the weight and authority of the Puritan legal system behind it. This also marked a significant shift in the public perception of the accused, who was now officially under suspicion of a grave crime. The arrest, to public spectacles of fear and shame, the arrests themselves were often carried out in a dramatic and highly public manner. Constables, armed with the arrest warrant, would arrive at the home of the accused, often in the middle of the night or during the day, while they were working in the fields. The accused were frequently dragged from their homes in front of their families, neighbors, and other onlookers, creating a public spectacle that served to further fuel the growing hysteria. These public arrests were not merely about apprehending a suspect. They were a form of social theater, designed to reinforce the community's belief in the reality of the threat and the guilt of the accused. The accused, often bewildered and terrified, were treated as dangerous criminals, their dignity stripped away as they were hauled off to jail. This public humiliation served to further stigmatize the accused and solidify the community's belief in their guilt, making it even more difficult for them to defend themselves. The arrests often involved physical restraint, with the accused being bound or shackled, adding to their humiliation and discomfort. The examinations, interrogations in the guise of justice. After being apprehended, the accused were brought before the magistrates for a preliminary examination. These examinations were essentially interrogations, designed to extract confessions and gather further evidence of witchcraft. They were not trials in the modern sense, with legal representation and a presumption of innocence. Instead, they were heavily biased proceedings where the accused were presumed guilty from the outset. The burden of proof. In a system that accepted spectral evidence as valid, rested on the accused to somehow prove their innocence, which was virtually impossible. The examinations typically took place in public spaces, such as the meeting house or the local tavern, known as the ordinary. This public setting further amplified the shame and humiliation of the accused, turning the proceedings into a form of public spectacle. The entire community could witness the questioning, the accusations, and the reactions of the afflicted girls, creating an atmosphere of intense pressure and fear. It also allowed for the community to actively participate in the process, further blurring the lines between accuser, judge, and jury. The magistrates' methods of coercion, intimidation, and leading questions. The magistrates, particularly John Hathorne, were known for their aggressive and often brutal interrogation methods. They employed a variety of tactics designed to coerce confessions from the accused, including relentless questioning, threats, intimidation, and appeals to religious guilt. They would often badger the accused for hours, demanding that they confess to their crimes and name other witches involved in the supposed conspiracy. The questioning was often circular, with the magistrates interpreting any denials or inconsistencies as further proof of guilt or deception. Hathorne, in particular, was notorious for his leading questions, designed to trap the accused into admitting guilt. For example, he famously asked Sarah Good, "What evil spirit have you familiarity with?" This question presumed her guilt from the outset, leaving her with no room to deny the accusation without appearing to be lying. He would often twist the words of the accused, interpreting their statements in the most unfavorable light possible. His goal was not to ascertain the truth, but to extract a confession that would confirm his pre-existing beliefs. He believed that those accused were inherently guilty, and that it was his duty to force them to confess their sins. The role of the afflicted girls. Evidence and performance. During these examinations, the afflicted girls were often present, and their reactions were considered crucial evidence. If the girls exhibited fits, claimed to be tormented by the specter of the accused, or showed any other signs of being afflicted, it was taken as proof that the accused was, in fact, a witch. Their performances in the courtroom were often dramatic and highly influential. They would writhe on the floor, scream, cry out in pain, and claim to see the specter of the accused attacking them. These displays were often contagious, with other girls joining in, creating a cacophony of accusations and a spectacle of suffering. The magistrates often actively encouraged these displays, prompting the girls to describe their torments and identify their tormentors. The girls' reactions were not merely observed. They were actively incorporated into the proceedings, becoming a central part of the evidence against the accused. This created a feedback loop where the girls' behavior reinforced the magistrates' beliefs, and the magistrates, questioning further, encouraged the girls' dramatic displays. The girls held a unique and terrifying power within the courtroom, their every word and action carrying immense weight. The search for physical evidence egg, the devil's mark. In addition to spectral evidence and the testimony of the afflicted girls, the magistrates also sought physical evidence of witchcraft. One of the most common forms of physical evidence was the so-called devil's mark. This was believed to be a mark or blemish on the body of the accused where the devil or his familiar had touched them. It could be a mole, a birthmark, a scar, or any other unusual skin feature. The accused were often subjected to humiliating physical examinations in a search for this mark. These examinations were typically conducted by a group of men or women from the community, often in a public setting. The accused would be stripped of their clothing and their bodies meticulously scrutinized for any sign of the devil's mark. The very act of being subjected to such an examination was a violation and further contributed to the shame and degradation of the accused. Any mark found was often interpreted as definitive proof of witchcraft, regardless of its actual nature. The power of confessioning, a path to salvation or further accusations. Confession played a complex and crucial role in the Salem Witch Trials. For the magistrates, a confession was the ultimate validation of their suspicions and a confirmation of the guilt of the accused. It was seen as a victory in the battle against the forces of evil. However, for the accused, confession was a double-edged sword. On one hand, confession offered a potential path to leniency. Those who confessed were often spared execution, as the court believed that they had repented and turned away from the devil. Confession was seen as an act of submission to God and the court, a sign that the individual was willing to acknowledge their sins and seek redemption. It was believed that a confessed witch was no longer under the devil's power and therefore posed less of a threat to the community. On the other hand, confession often led to further accusations. The magistrates would pressure those who confessed to name other witches, thereby expanding the circle of suspicion and fueling the hysteria. This created a dangerous dynamic where individuals were incentivized to falsely accuse others in order to save themselves. This also meant that confessing did not guarantee safety, as the confessed could still be imprisoned and face social ostracism. Many confessed simply to escape the torture and the harsh conditions of their imprisonment. Tituba's confessioning, a catalyst for chaos, the confession of Titba, the South American Indian slave in Reverend Parris's household, was particularly significant. It was one of the first confessions obtained and set a precedent for many that followed. Her confession was filled with vivid and fantastical details of encounters with the devil, descriptions of witches' sabbaths, and the signing of the devil's book. Tituba's confession, likely coursed and influenced by the leading questions of the magistrates, was exactly what the court wanted to hear. It provided a narrative that confirmed their pre-existing beliefs about witchcraft and the devil's presence in Salem. It also provided a framework for understanding the strange behavior of the afflicted girls, attributing their fits and accusations to the malevolent influence of witches. Her confession had a profound and far-reaching impact. It not only validated the accusations of the afflicted girls, but also fueled the growing hysteria, leading to a dramatic increase in the number of accusations and arrests. It set in motion a chain reaction, a cycle of accusation, confession, and further accusation that would consume Salem for months. The imprisonment, a grim reality. Those who were accused and arrested, whether they confessed or not, were typically imprisoned while awaiting trial. The conditions in the Salem jail were deplorable. Prisoners were often held in cramped, dark, and unsanitary cells, with little food or water. They were often subjected to further interrogation and pressure to confess. The experience of imprisonment was particularly harsh for those who maintained their innocence. They were forced to endure not only the physical hardships of jail, but also the psychological torment of knowing that they had been falsely accused and that their lives hung in the balance. Many suffered from illness and malnutrition, and some died in prison before they could even be brought to trial. The psychological toll of being imprisoned, isolated from loved ones, and facing an uncertain future was immense. The trials, a aid of legality, the trials themselves, held before the court of liar and terminer, were a far cry from a fair and impartial legal process. The judges, including William Stoughton, the Chief Justice, were deeply biased against the accused. They were firm believers in the reality of witchcraft and saw it as their duty to eradicate this evil from the community. Spectral evidence. The testimony of the afflicted girls about being tormented by the specters of the accused was not only admissible in court, but was often the primary evidence presented against the accused. This type of evidence was inherently subjective and impossible to refute, creating a system where the accused were essentially presumed guilty unless they could prove their innocence, which was virtually impossible given the nature of the accusations. The burden of proof was placed on the accused in a way that made it impossible to meet. The trials were often brief and perfunctory, with little opportunity for the accused to present a meaningful defense. They were often denied legal counsel and were not allowed to call witnesses on their own behalf. The outcome of the trials was often a foregone conclusion, with the judges heavily influenced by the dramatic displays of the afflicted girls and their own deeply held beliefs in the reality of witchcraft. The trials were more about confirming pre-existing beliefs than about seeking truth and justice. The executions, a tragic culmination. Those found guilty of witchcraft were sentenced to death by hanging. The executions were carried out in public on Gallows Hill, serving as a grim warning to the community and a supposed triumph over the forces of evil. The executions were a somber and unsettling spectacle, drawing large crowds of onlookers. The first execution, that of Bridget Bishop, took place on June 10, 1692. Over the next few months, 18 other individuals were hanged, each execution further solidifying the community's belief in the reality of the witch hunt, while simultaneously deepening the sense of fear and paranoia. The executions did not bring an end to the crisis, but rather seemed to fuel it further. Each death added to the collective trauma and further divided the community. The role of social and political context. To fully understand the Salem Witch Trials, it's crucial to consider the broader social and political context in which they occurred. Salem Village was a community rife with internal conflicts and anxieties. Land disputes. Disputes over land ownership and boundaries were common and often bitter, creating deep divisions within the community. The Putnam family, for instance, was involved in numerous land disputes, and some historians believe that these conflicts may have influenced the accusations made by Anne Putnam Jader and her mother. Religious discording. The appointment of Samuel Parris as the new minister had been a source of contention within the community. There were divisions between those who supported his strict and often harsh interpretation of Puritanism and those who favored a more moderate approach. These religious disagreements added another layer of complexity to the already strained social fabric. Political instability. The Massachusetts Bay Colony was experiencing a period of political uncertainty. Its original charter had been revoked by the British Crown, leaving the colony in a state of legal limbo. This instability created a sense of insecurity and anxiety among the colonists, making them more susceptible to fear and rumor. The lack of a stable governing structure may have contributed to the sense that the established order was under threat, both from within and without. fear of Native American attacks. The ongoing conflicts with Native American tribes added to the general atmosphere of fear and insecurity. The colonists lived with the constant threat of attack, and this fear was often projected onto those who were perceived as different or other. These fears were further exacerbated by stories of Native Americans being in league with the devil, creating a climate of suspicion towards anyone who did not fit the mold of a good Puritan. The turning point seeds of doubt and the dissolution of the court as the summer of 1692 wore on. The number of accusations and executions continued to rise. However, seeds of doubt began to be sown in the minds of some influential figures within the colony. The sheer scale of the accusations and the increasingly prominent social standing of some of those being accused began to raise concerns. Increase Mather, a respected Boston minister, published Cases of Conscience Concerning Evil Spirits, a treatise that questioned the validity of spectral evidence. He argued that it was better for 10 suspected witches to escape than for one innocent person to be condemned. His son, Cotton Mather, while still believing in witchcraft, also began to express reservations about the court's methods. Governor William Phips, upon returning to the colony and finding his own wife accused of witchcraft, finally intervened. He dissolved the Court of Liar and Terminer in October 1692 and established a new superior court of judicature. This new court disallowed spectral evidence, he effectively bringing an end to the trials. He also pardoned many of those who had been condemned to death. The aftermath, a community scarred and lessons, learned by the time the trials ended in early 1693. 19 people had been hanged. One man, Giles Corey, had been pressed to death for refusing to enter a plea, and several others had died in prison. The community of Salem was left deeply scarred by the events. Families were shattered. Reputations were ruined, and the social fabric was torn apart. In the years that followed, there were attempts to make amends. Some of the accusers, including Anne Putnam Jader, eventually offered public apologies for their roles in the trials. The Massachusetts legislature passed a bill restoring the rights and good names of many of those who had been accused. Financial compensation was also offered to the families of the victims. However, the Salem Witch Trials remain a chilling reminder of the dangers of mass hysteria, the abuse of power, and the importance of due process. They serve as a cautionary tale about the fragility of justice when fear and superstition are allowed to trump reason and evidence. The trials continue to be studied and analyzed, offering valuable insights into the complexities of human behavior and the dark potential that resides within all societies. They compel us to examine our own biases, to question authority, and to remain vigilant in the defense of individual rights and the pursuit of true justice. The legacy of Salem serves as a potent reminder that even in the most seemingly enlightened societies, the potential for injustice and the abuse of power always lurks beneath the surface, waiting for the right conditions to emerge and wreak havoc. Part 4. The Psychology of Accusation and Belief. A psychoanalytic perspective on the Salem Witch Trials. To understand the Salem Witch Trials, we must move beyond the simplistic narrative of good versus evil and delve into the complex psychological landscape of the individuals involved. This was a time of immense social, political, and religious upheaval, all of which contributed to a climate of fear and uncertainty. Through a psychoanalytic lens, we can examine the motivations, anxieties, and defense mechanisms that may have driven the actions of the accusers, the accused, and the authorities who presided over this dark chapter in American history. The accusers. A web of motives. The young girls who initiated the accusations were the focal point of the crisis. Their fits, contortions, and claims of spectral torment were the catalyst for the entire witch hunt. Understanding their psychology is crucial to unraveling the mystery of Salem, hysteria, and conversion disordering. From a modern psychological perspective, the girls' symptoms bear a striking resemblance to what we now call conversion disorder, a condition where psychological distress manifests as physical symptoms. The intense religious fervor of Puritan society, coupled with the strict social constraints placed upon young women, may have created a breeding ground for such psychological distress. The fits and hallucinations could be seen as an unconscious rebellion against the oppressive social order, a way to express repressed emotions and desires in a way that was, paradoxically, acceptable within the framework of Puritan belief. They were, after all, seen as victims of evil, not as outcasts. Attention and power. The accusations brought the girls unprecedented attention and a strange form of power within the community. They went from being relatively powerless children to individuals whose every word could determine the fate of others. This newfound power, however fleeting and ultimately destructive, may have been a significant motivating factor for some of the accusers. The trials gave them a voice, albeit a distorted one, in a society where they were typically expected to remain silent and obedient. Group dynamics and suggestibility. The girls were not isolated individuals. They were part of a close, knit group. The phenomenon of mass hysteria, also known as collective obsessional behavior, suggests that psychological distress can spread rapidly within a group, particularly in a closed and highly suggestible environment. The girls' symptoms and accusations may have reinforced each other, creating a feedback loop of escalating fear and paranoia. It's also possible that some of the girls were influenced by others, their symptoms and accusations shaped by the expectations and behaviors of their peers. the power of suggestion, particularly in a highly charged emotional atmosphere, cannot be underestimated. Trauma and displacement. Some of the accusers, like Mercy Lewis, had experienced significant trauma, such as witnessing the violent deaths of family members in Native American attacks. Their accusations could be interpreted as a way of processing these traumatic experiences, projecting their inner turmoil and anxieties onto external scapegoats. The witches became a symbolic representation of the dangers and uncertainties that pervaded their lives, allowing them to displace their fears onto a tangible enemy. Social and economic factors. It's also important to consider the potential influence of social and economic factors. Some of the accusers, particularly Ann Putnam Jaber, came from families involved in land disputes and other conflicts within the community. Their accusations may have been, in part, motivated by a desire to settle scores or gain an advantage in these disputes. The trials provided an opportunity to eliminate rivals or enemies under the guise of rooting out witchcraft. This suggests that personal vendettas may have played a role in shaping the course of the accusations. The accusing, victims of projection and paranoia. The individuals accused of witchcraft were a diverse group, ranging from marginalized outcasts to respected members of the community. Their psychological responses to the accusations varied, but many shared a common experience of bewilderment, fear, and despair. Denial and disbelief. Many of the accused initially responded with denial and disbelief, unable to comprehend the accusations against them. They were often deeply religious individuals who believed in the reality of witchcraft, but could not fathom being accused of such a heinous crime. This cognitive dissonance, the clash between their self-image and the accusations, likely caused significant psychological distress, fear, and helplessness. As the accusations escalated and the trials progressed, many of the accused experienced intense fear and a sense of helplessness. They were trapped in a system that seemed designed to convict them, with little opportunity to defend themselves against the intangible evidence of spectral torment. The threat of execution, coupled with the social ostracism and the destruction of their reputations, created a climate of terror. Anger and resignation. Some of the accused, like John Proctor and Sarah Good, responded with anger and defiance, challenging the authority of the court and the validity of the accusations. Others, like Rebecca Nurse, maintained a quiet dignity and resignation, trusting in their faith and their innocence. These different responses reflect individual personality differences, as well as varying degrees of hope and despair. The psychological toll of imprisonment. The harsh conditions of imprisonment, coupled with the constant threat of execution and the uncertainty of their fate, took a significant psychological toll on the accused. Many suffered from anxiety, depression, and despair. Some may have experienced what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of the trauma of being accused, imprisoned, and facing the prospect of death. The authorities, the psychology of power and belief. The magistrates and other authorities who presided over the Salem Witch Trials were not impartial arbiters of justice. They were deeply embedded in the Puritan power structure and were firm believers in the reality of witchcraft. Their actions were driven by a complex interplay of religious conviction, political ambition, and psychological biases. Confirmation bias. The magistrates, particularly John Hathorne and William Stoughton, exhibited a strong confirmation bias. They were predisposed to believe in the guilt of the accused and interpreted the evidence, however flimsy, in a way that confirmed their pre-existing beliefs. They actively sought out evidence that supported the accusations and dismissed or ignored evidence that contradicted them. This cognitive bias, common to all humans, was amplified by their positions of power and their deep-seated fear of witchcraft. Groupthink. The magistrates and other authorities operated within a closed system, reinforcing each other's beliefs and biases. This phenomenon, known as groupthink, can lead to flawed decision-making, as dissenting voices are suppressed and alternative perspectives are ignored. The pressure to conform to the prevailing belief in witchcraft made it difficult for any individual magistrate to question the proceedings or challenge the validity of the evidence. The need for control. The Puritan authorities were obsessed with maintaining social order and control. They saw witchcraft as a direct threat to their authority and the stability of their community. The trials, therefore, became a way to reassert control in a time of uncertainty and upheaval. By identifying and punishing those accused of witchcraft, they sought to reinforce their power and quell any potential dissent or rebellion. The perceived threat of the devil, working within their community, created a need to re-establish order and reaffirm their authority. Moral disengagementing. The magistrates may have engaged in what psychologists call moral disengagement, a process by which individuals justify their harmful actions by dehumanizing their victims or minimizing the consequences of their behavior. By believing that the accused were in league with the devil, the magistrates could rationalize their harsh treatment and the imposition of the death penalty. They saw themselves as righteous warriors battling against the forces of evil, a belief that allowed them to suspend their normal moral constraints. Political ambition. Some historians have suggested that political ambition may have played a role in the actions of certain magistrates. William Stoughton, for example, was a powerful figure in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, and his involvement in the trials may have been motivated, in part, by a desire to further his political career. The trials provided an opportunity to demonstrate his commitment to upholding Puritan values and his ability to deal decisively with perceived threats to the colony. The collective psychology of Salem, mass hysteria and scapegoating. The Salem Witch Trials were not simply the product of individual psychological factors. They were also a manifestation of collective psychological processes. The phenomenon of mass hysteria, where psychological distress spreads rapidly through a group, played a significant role in the events. Fear and anxiety. The community of Salem was experiencing a period of intense fear and anxiety, fueled by political instability, economic hardship, and the constant threat of Native American attacks. This collective anxiety created a fertile ground for the spread of mass hysteria. The fear of the unknown, coupled with the deeply ingrained belief in the devil's power, made the community susceptible to suggestion and prone to irrational beliefs. Scapegoating. The witch trials provided a convenient mechanism for scapegoating. By blaming the community's problems on a small group of individuals accused of witchcraft, the residents of Salem could externalize their anxieties and fears. The accused witches became a symbolic representation of everything that was wrong in their society, allowing the community to project their own internal conflicts and tensions onto an external enemy. This process of scapegoating provided a temporary sense of relief and a way to reaffirm social cohesion, albeit at a terrible cost. Social contagioning. The symptoms and accusations of the afflicted girls spread rapidly through the community, like a contagious disease. This social contagion was facilitated by the close-knit nature of Salem society and the powerful influence of group dynamics. The girls' behaviors and claims reinforced each other, creating a feedback loop that amplified the hysteria and made it increasingly difficult for individuals to resist the prevailing belief in witchcraft. The power of suggestion and the desire to conform played a significant role in this process. The breakdown of social norms. The witch trials led to a breakdown of social norms and a climate of pervasive distrust. Neighbors accused neighbors, families were torn apart, and long-standing friendships were destroyed. The normal rules of social interaction were suspended, replaced by an atmosphere of fear and suspicion. This breakdown of social cohesion further fueled the hysteria, creating a vicious cycle of accusation and counter-accusation. Conclusion: a complex tapestry of psychological factors. The Salem Witch Trials were a complex and multifaceted event, driven by a confluence of psychological, social, political, and religious factors. By examining the motivations, anxieties, and behaviors of the individuals involved through a psychoanalytic lens, we can gain a deeper understanding of this dark chapter in American history. The trials serve as a cautionary tale about the power of fear, the dangers of mass hysteria, and the fragility of justice when reason and evidence are replaced by superstition and prejudice. They also highlight the enduring need for critical thinking, empathy, and a commitment to protecting individual rights in the face of collective anxieties and societal pressures. The psychological scars of Salem remain, reminding us of the dark potential that resides within all societies and the importance of safeguarding against the forces that can lead to such tragic outcomes. The events in Salem, though centuries old, continue to offer valuable, albeit disturbing, insights into the human psyche and the complexities of social behavior. They underscore the importance of understanding the psychological underpinnings of historical events to prevent similar tragedies from occurring in the future. Part 5. The Enduring Legacy of Salem, a call to remember the Salem Witch Trials, a chilling testament to the destructive power of fear and mass hysteria, ultimately concluded in 1693. 19 individuals were hanged, one pressed to death, and several more perished in prison. The trials left an indelible scar on the community and continue to haunt the American conscience. While apologies were eventually offered and attempts were made at restitution, the tragedy of Salem cannot be undone. The lessons of Salem, however, must endure. This dark chapter serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of justice, the dangers of unchecked power, and the vital importance of critical thinking, empathy, and due process. We must remain vigilant against the forces of prejudice, superstition, and mass hysteria that can so easily lead us astray. The story of Salem is not just a historical footnote. It is a mirror reflecting the shadows that still lurk within our own societies, urging us to confront our biases and stand firm against injustice. Let us remember Salem, not just as a tragedy, but as a call to action, a call to build a more just and rational world. If you found this exploration of the Salem Witch Trials thought-provoking, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into historical mysteries and the complexities of human behavior. Your support helps us continue to explore these important stories. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think is the most important lesson we should learn from Salem?